The glass shattered 3 feet from Ada Wade's head, and the entire dance floor froze. She stood in the center of the Broken Bluff town hall, her hand still resting on the shoulder of a cattle buyer she barely knew, as whiskey dripped down the wall behind her. The music had died with the crash. Every eye in the room turned toward the doorway where Silas Pruitt stood, dust from the trail still coating his tan coat, his angular face set in a mask of controlled fury. Ada had been in town for 8 months, long enough to build a reputation as the best singer the Silver Spur Saloon had ever hired, long enough that respectable women nodded to her on the street, even if they never quite invited her to their parlors, long enough to almost believe she could leave her past buried in the Montana Territory, where it belonged. Silas took 3 steps into the hall. His sandy brown hair was windblown, his dark vest stained with sweat and trail dirt. He moved like a man who worked horses for a living, all coiled strength and barely contained energy. His gaze locked on Ada, and something cold slid down her spine. He knows, she thought. Somehow, he knows. The cattle buyer released her hand and stepped back. Smart man. The crowd parted as Silas crossed the floor, boot heels striking wood with deliberate force. Ada held her ground, because running would only confirm whatever suspicion burned behind those hard eyes. He stopped close enough that she could smell horse sweat and leather, close enough that his voice carried only to her when he spoke. You are not who you claim to be. The words hit like a physical blow. Ada kept her face calm, kept her voice steady. I do not know what you mean, Mr. Pruitt. His jaw tightened. The muscle jumped beneath skin darkened by sun and wind. Yes, you do. And we are going to talk about it. Now, she could refuse. She could make a scene. She could appeal to the crowd of townspeople who thought they knew Ada Wade, the respectable saloon singer who never caused trouble and sang hymns at Sunday socials when asked. But Silas Pruitt trained horses at the Star Ranch, 5 miles outside town. He spent weeks at a time on the range, working with wild mustangs and problem animals. If he had ridden in specifically to confront her, he had a reason. And if he knew even part of her real story, refusing would only make it worse. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Very well. But not here. They walked in silence down the main street of Broken Bluff. Ada's mind raced through possibilities, through lies she could tell, through truths she absolutely could not afford to reveal. Behind them, the music started again, tentative and uncertain. Tomorrow, the gossip would spread like wildfire. Ada Wade, confronted at the town dance by Silas Pruitt, the horse trainer, who rarely came to town and never socialized. Silas guided her toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open range and the wind carried the smell of sage and dust. Far enough from listening ears, close enough to the Silver Spur that she could run if needed. He stopped beside a water trough and turned to face her. Moonlight caught the hard lines of his face, turned his eyes to shadows. I know you are using a dead woman's name. Ada's breath caught. Her hands clenched in the fabric of her shawl. How much did he know? How much could she afford to admit? Silas continued, his voice low and rough. The real Ada Wade died in a typhoid outbreak in Silver City 3 years ago. I was there. I helped bury her. So whoever you are, you stole her identity when you came here. She forced herself to meet his gaze. And what do you intend to do about it? His expression did not change. That depends on why you did it. The honest answer would destroy her. The dishonest answer would make an enemy of a man who clearly valued truth. Ada chose the only path that might buy her time. I needed to disappear. There were people looking for me. Using a dead woman's name was the only way to start over without a trail. Why were they looking for you? Her throat tightened. I cannot tell you that. Cannot. Or will not. Both. Silas studied her for a long moment. The wind tugged at his coat, pushed dust across the empty street. Finally, he said, there is a federal marshal coming through Broken Bluff next week. He is hunting a fugitive who robbed a bank in Cheyenne 2 years ago. If he finds out you are using false papers, he will assume you are connected. Ice flooded Ada's veins. I had nothing to do with any bank robbery. Can you prove that? She could not. Everything she owned was tied to the name Ada Wade, a name that belonged to a corpse in Silver City. If a federal marshal started asking questions, the house of cards would collapse, and beneath it, they would find the real reason she had run. The reason she could never, ever go back. Silas took a step closer. His voice gentled, just slightly. I am not your enemy. But if you want to stay in Broken Bluff, you need protection. You need someone who can vouch for you. Someone the marshal will believe. Why would you help me? Because I recognize desperation when I see it. And because whatever you are running from, I do not think it makes you a criminal. Ada wanted to laugh, wanted to cry, wanted to trust this hard-eyed stranger who had just blown her carefully constructed life wide open. But trust was the one luxury she could not afford. How do I know you will not turn me in yourself? You do not. But I am offering you a choice. Let me help you, or face the marshal alone. The wind carried the distant sound of the dance. Fiddle music and laughter from people who did not live with secrets burning holes in their souls. Ada thought of her small room above the saloon, the life she had built note by note, the fragile sense of safety she had fooled herself into believing. What kind of help? Silas's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something less severe. Public association. If people see you and me together, if they think we are courting, it gives you legitimacy. The marshal is less likely to question a woman who has ties to a respected ranch worker. You want to pretend to court me. I want to give you a reason to stay that does not involve running again. The offer hung between them, impossible and strangely tempting. Ada knew she should refuse, knew that tangling her life with anyone else's was dangerous. But Silas Pruitt was right about one thing. She could not run again. She had nowhere left to go. Why do you care what happens to me? His jaw tightened again. Because I know what it is like to carry a secret that could ruin you. And because no one helped me when I needed it. There was a story there, buried beneath the hard exterior and the careful control. Ada recognized the shape of it because she carried the same weight. Secrets that isolated. Shame that could not be shared. The exhausting work of pretending to be someone safe. She took a breath. If we do this, there are rules. You do not ask about my past. You do not push for answers I cannot give. And when the marshal leaves town, we end the arrangement. Silas nodded slowly. Agreed. But you have to make it believable. People have to think we are genuinely interested in each other. How do we do that? We start by you letting me walk you home from the dance, like a gentleman caller. Ada glanced back toward the town hall. The dance would go on for another hour at least. Walking back in together, walking out together, would set tongues wagging by morning. Which was exactly the point. She turned back to Silas and found him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. There was something dangerous about him. Not violent, not cruel, but dangerous in the way that truth was dangerous. The way that being truly seen could crack open all the carefully maintained walls. "All right," she said quietly. "We have an agreement." They walked back into the town hall together. The music faltered again. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye tracked their progress across the floor as Silas kept his hand at the small of Ada's back, the touch formal but unmistakable. She could feel the heat of his palm through the fabric of her dress and shawl. Mrs. Henley, the banker's wife, stared openly. Mr. Calhoun, who owned the general store, whispered something to his son. The cattle buyer Ada had been dancing with found sudden interest in his boots. Let them look. Let them talk. By morning, half of Broken Bluff would be speculating about Ada Wade and Silas Pruitt. By the time the marshal arrived, it would be established fact that they were keeping company. Silas leaned close enough that his breath stirred the hair at her temple. "You need to look less like you are walking to your execution." Ada forced her shoulders to relax, forced something like a smile onto her face. This was a performance. She knew how to perform. Every night on the saloon stage was a performance. She could do this. They made it to the door, stepped out into the cool night air. The moment they were out of sight, Ada pulled away from his touch. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Silas walked beside her in silence for half a block before he spoke. "You did well. I have practice pretending." "So do I." They walked the length of the main street, past the general store and the land office, and the sheriff's office, where a single lamp burned in the window. Past the livery stable where horses shifted in their stalls. The Silver Spur sat at the far end of town, a 2-story building with a painted sign, and the sound of piano music drifting through the doors. Ada stopped at the base of the exterior stairs that led to her room. "This is far enough. People have seen us. The gossip will start tonight." Silas studied the building, the stairs, the dark window of her room. "When does the marshal arrive?" "Tuesday afternoon, according to the wire at the land office. 4 days. We need to be seen together at least twice more before then. Can you come out to the Star Ranch tomorrow? I work tomorrow evening." "Morning then. I will send a wagon." Ada's instinct was to refuse, to keep distance, to maintain control. But control was an illusion she could no longer afford. "Fine. But I leave by noon." Silas nodded. "Then I will see you in the morning, Miss Wade." The name felt like a knife between her ribs. Miss Wade. The dead woman whose identity she wore like stolen clothes. But she only said, "Good night, Mr. Pruitt." She climbed the stairs without looking back, but she could feel his gaze on her until she reached the top and slipped through her door. Only then did she let herself lean against the rough wood and close her eyes. What had she just agreed to? Fake courtship with a man who already knew her darkest secret. Public performance with someone who could destroy her with a single word to the right authority. And 4 days to make it convincing enough that a federal marshal would not look too closely at the saloon singer with no past and a borrowed name. Ada crossed to the small window and looked down. Silas still stood in the street below, a dark figure in the moonlight. As she watched, he turned and walked away. his stride purposeful and controlled. She had meant what she said. She could not tell him the whole truth, could not risk that he would look at her with disgust instead of that careful neutrality. Because the secret she carried was worse than stolen identity, worse than running from a past. She had been married to a man who everyone respected, a man with money and position and a reputation that stretched across 3 territories. And when she finally found the courage to leave him, when she finally ran from the private hell of his control and his fists and his cold certainty that she belonged to him like livestock, she knew he would never stop looking. Her husband did not know she was in Broken Bluff, did not know she was calling herself Ada Wade. But if a federal marshal started digging into her background, asking questions, sending wires to other towns, eventually the trail would lead back. And her husband would find her. She could not let that happen, which meant she needed Silas Pruitt's protection, even if accepting it felt like trading one form of dependence for another. Ada pulled the curtain closed and lit the oil lamp on her dresser. 4 days. She could maintain a performance for 4 days. After that, the marshal would leave, and she could end the arrangement with Silas and return to her careful, solitary life. She almost believed it. Morning came too quickly. Ada woke to the sound of wagon wheels on the street below and knew without looking that Silas had sent for her exactly as promised. She dressed in her most practical clothing, a brown cotton dress and her sturdiest shawl, and braided her dark hair back in a simple plait. No need for saloon glamour at a working ranch. The driver was a boy of perhaps 15, with sun-bleached hair and a gap-toothed grin. "Mr. Pruitt said to fetch you, miss. Says you are coming out to see the new foals." Ada climbed onto the wagon seat. The boy kept up a steady stream of chatter as they rolled out of town, talking about horses and weather and the water dispute that had half the valley ready to draw guns. Ada listened with half her attention, watching the landscape open up into rolling grassland and distant bluffs. The Star Ranch spread across a wide valley with good water and better grazing. The main house was solid timber construction, built to last. But it was the corrals that drew the eye, a complex of fences and training rings where horses moved in controlled circles, their coats gleaming in the morning sun. Silas stood in the center of one ring, working a black gelding on a long lead line. He wore no coat in the heat, just his dark vest over a worn shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. Sweat darkened the fabric between his shoulder blades. He moved with the horse, reading its body language, adjusting his position with fluid grace. The boy pulled the wagon to a stop near the fence. Silas glanced over, acknowledged Ada with a brief nod, but did not stop working. She climbed down and approached the fence, drawn despite herself. The gelding was nervous, ears flicking back and forth, muscles tense beneath glossy hide. But Silas did not push, did not force. He simply stood, patient and still, until the horse took a step toward him. Then another. When the gelding was close enough, Silas reached out slowly and ran his hand down the animal's neck. It was the gentlest thing Ada had ever seen him do. "He is beautiful," she said quietly. Silas stroked the horse's shoulder. "He was beaten by his last owner. Took me 3 weeks just to get a halter on him. But he is learning to trust again." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that had nothing to do with horses. Ada gripped the fence rail and watched Silas lead the gelding in a slow circle, watched the animal's tension gradually ease. "How long does it take for them to trust you?" Silas glanced at her. His expression was unreadable in the shadow of his hat brim. As long as it takes. Some heal faster than others. Some never fully heal. But that does not mean they cannot have good lives. Ada swallowed against the tightness in her throat. You are very patient. With horses, yes. With people, less so. He brought the gelding to a halt and began removing the training equipment with efficient movements. The boy appeared to take the horse, and Silas crossed to the fence where Ada stood. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the weathering of sun and wind, the controlled strength in his hands as he gripped the top rail. We need to talk, he said. Not here. Walk with me. They walked beyond the corrals to where the land sloped down toward a creek lined with cottonwoods. The sound of running water was cool and soothing after the dusty heat of the training yard. Silas stopped in the shade and turned to face her. I made inquiries yesterday after the dance. Asked some careful questions. The marshal who is coming, his name is Garrett. He has a reputation for being thorough. If he decides to investigate you, he will not stop until he finds something. Ada's stomach nodded. What are you saying? I am saying we need to make our arrangement more convincing. Being seen together at a dance is not enough. We need a story, a history, something that explains why we are together and why no one should question your presence here. What kind of story? The kind where we have been keeping company quietly for months. The kind where I am courting you with honorable intentions. The kind where our relationship is serious enough that questioning your past would be questioning my judgment. That is a significant lie. Yes, but it is a necessary one. Ada turned away, staring at the creek. The water ran clear over smooth stones, innocent and uncomplicated. Nothing like the tangled web she was trapped in. And what happens when the marshal leaves? When we no longer need the pretense. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then we decide together how to end it. But Ada, there is something else you need to know. She closed her eyes, bracing for whatever blow was coming next. The fugitive the marshal is hunting. The bank robber. His last known association was with a man named Clayton Vance. Does that name mean anything to you? Every muscle in Ada's body went rigid. Her breath stopped. The world narrowed to the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Silas continued, his voice careful. Clayton Vance is a wealthy landowner from Montana Territory. Respected. Connected. And according to the wire the marshal sent ahead, Vance has been looking for his missing wife for 2 years. He claims she was abducted by outlaws associated with the bank robbery. Ada could not breathe, could not think. Clayton, her husband, the man she had, fled in the dead of night, with nothing but the clothes on her back, and the desperate certainty that staying would kill her. He was still looking, still weaving his lies, still presenting himself as the wronged husband searching for his stolen bride. Silas stepped closer. Ada. Is Clayton Vance your husband? She wanted to lie, wanted to deny. But the truth was written all over her face, in the trembling of her hands, in the way she had gone pale as death at the mention of his name. Yes. And the abduction story. A lie. I left him. I ran, because if I stayed, he would have killed me eventually. Silas's jaw tightened. Did he hit you? Yes. And worse. She forced the words out, each one scraping her throat raw. He was careful. Nothing that would show in public. Nothing that would damage his reputation. But behind closed doors, he owned me. Controlled everything I did, everyone I spoke to, every moment of my life. When I finally escaped, I knew he would hunt me. Knew he would use his connections and his money and his respectable name to track me down. So, I disappeared. I stole a dead woman's identity, and I ran as far as I could. The silence that followed was broken only by the creak in the wind. Ada could not look at Silas, could not bear to see disgust or pity, or worst of all, the careful neutrality of someone who wished he had never gotten involved. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. If the marshal connects you to Vance, he will send for him. Vance will come here and claim you, and there is nothing I or anyone else can do to stop him. A man has legal right to his wife. I know. Her voice cracked. That is why I can never let anyone know who I really am. What is your real name? Does it matter? Yes. Because if we are going to make this work, I need to know who I am protecting. She turned to face him, saw something fierce and protective burning behind his controlled exterior. Saw the same barely leashed rage she felt every time she thought about Clayton and his calculated cruelty. Sarah. My name is Sarah Vance, and I am not going back to him. I would rather die. You are not going to die. Silas moved closer, his presence solid and grounding. And you are not going back to him. But we need to be smart. If the marshal asks questions, if he starts digging, you need to have answers that are consistent with Ada Wade's history. Can you do that? I have been doing it for 8 months. Good. Because starting today, our courtship becomes public and obvious. I will escort you to church on Sunday. I will have dinner with you at the hotel. I will make it clear to everyone in Broken Bluff that I am courting you with the intention of marriage. Marriage. The word hit like a punch. That is taking it too far. Is it? Think about it, Sarah. If people believe we are engaged, or close to it, the marshal has no reason to question your presence here. You become my responsibility, my business, and he moves on. And what do you get out of this? I get to keep a secret that is eating me alive from the inside. Because if I help you, maybe it balances out some of what I have done. Ada studied his face, the hard lines, the shadows in his eyes, the weight of whatever guilt he carried. You said you know what it is like to carry a secret that could ruin you. What did you do? Silas looked away, his hands clenched at his sides. I killed a man. 5 years ago. He was a ranch foreman who was beating his workers, stealing wages, running a corrupt operation that the owner either did not know about or did not care about. I confronted him. He drew on me. I shot him. It was self-defense, but the owner was his brother. He had money and influence. I was a drifter with no ties and no proof. So I ran. Changed my name. Started over. Your name is not really Silas Pruitt. No. But it has been for 5 years, and I have built a life around it. Just like you built a life around Ada Wade. So I understand what you are risking. And I understand why you cannot go back. They stood facing each other in the dappled shade. Two people carrying false names and buried pasts, bound together by necessity and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could protect each other long enough to survive. Ada took a shaky breath. All right, we do this your way. But Silas, if Clayton comes here, if he finds me, you have to promise me you will not try to stand between us. He is dangerous. He has killed men who got in his way. I will not have your death on my conscience. His expression went hard as stone. I am not letting him take you. You may not have a choice. Then we make sure it does not come to that. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Ada, dressed in her best gown, a deep green cotton with simple trim, and pinned her hair up in a style that was respectable, but not severe. When Silas called for her in a borrowed buggy, half the town saw him help her up to the seat with careful courtesy. They walked into church together, sat in a pew near the middle, where everyone could see them. When the hymn started, Silas did not sing, but he stood beside her and held the hymnal steady. His presence was solid and anchoring in a way Ada had not expected. After the service, Mrs. Henley approached with a calculating smile. "Miss Wade, how delightful to see you keeping company with Mr. Pruitt. We had no idea you two were acquainted." Ada returned the smile with practiced ease. "Mr. Pruitt has been kind enough to show me the Star Ranch. I have always admired horses, and Mr. Pruitt has always admired your singing." Mrs. Henley's eyes were sharp with curiosity. "Will we be hearing wedding bells soon?" Silas placed his hand at the small of Ada's back. The touch warmed through the fabric of her dress. "That remains to be seen, Mrs. Henley. But I am a patient man." The gossip spread through the churchyard like wildfire. By the time Silas drove Ada back to the Silver Spur, the entire town would know that the horse trainer and the saloon singer were courting in earnest. Monday morning brought news that tightened the vise. The marshal had sent another wire. He would arrive Tuesday afternoon as planned, and he was bringing a deputy. The investigation was serious. The reward for the bank robber was substantial, and Clayton Vance had personally offered an additional reward for information leading to his wife's recovery. Silas rode into town at midday and found Ada in her room above the saloon. His expression was grim. "We have a problem." Vance sent the marshal a description of his missing wife. Dark hair, late 20s, distinctive scar on her left wrist from a broken watch chain. Ada instinctively pulled her sleeve down over the thin white line that marked where Clayton had grabbed her, where the delicate chain had snapped and cut deep. She had told people it was from a kitchen accident. The description matches you closely enough that if the marshal sees you and makes the connection, he will investigate. Which means we need to give him a reason not to look too closely. What kind of reason? Silas pulled a small box from his coat pocket, set it on the table between them. An engagement. Public and binding enough that questioning you means questioning me. And if he questions me, the ranch owner will back my reputation. Vance is a stranger. I am known here. Ada stared at the box. Her hands trembled. "This is too much. You cannot tie yourself to me like this. When the truth comes out, it will destroy your life here. If the truth comes out, we both lose everything. This way, we have a chance." His voice gentled. "Sarah, I know this is asking more than you want to give, but it is the only way I can see to keep you safe." She opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band, worn and scratched, clearly not new. "Where did you get this?" "It was my mother's. She died when I was 12. It is the only thing I kept from my life before." Ada could not breathe. He was offering her everything. Protection. Safety. A chance to stay in the only place that had felt like home since she fled Montana. And all it would cost was binding herself to another man, even if it was only pretense. Even if he promised it was temporary. The ring blurred in her vision. I left one marriage. I swore I would never belong to a man again. You would not belong to me. This is a business arrangement. A shield. When the danger passes, you are free to leave. I will not hold you. Why would you do this? Risk this much for someone you barely know. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because 5 years ago, someone I cared about was in danger. And I was not brave enough to help her. I ran instead. And she died because I was a coward. I will not make that mistake again. The rawness in his voice broke something open inside her. Ada looked up and saw the guilt carved into every line of his face. Saw the man beneath the hard exterior, the one who carried his failures like stones in his pockets. She picked up the ring, felt the weight of it, the history, the promise it represented, even if the promise was a calculated lie. If we do this, there are still rules. You do not touch me unless it is for show. You do not make demands. You do not act like you own me. This is protection, not possession. Agreed. And when this is over, you let me go. No guilt, no obligation, no lingering claim. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. When this is over, you are free. Ada slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit nearly perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. She stared at it, this symbol of a fake engagement that felt more real than her actual marriage ever had. Because Silas was not asking her to be less than she was not demanding she break herself into manageable pieces. He was simply offering to stand beside her while she fought her own battles. It was more than Clayton had ever given her. They went public that evening. Silas took Ada to dinner at the hotel dining room, and when the owner offered congratulations on their engagement, they accepted with calm grace. Ada wore the gold band on her left hand, where everyone could see it. By nightfall, the news had reached every corner of Broken Bluff. Tuesday afternoon arrived with the weight of a storm front. The marshal rode in on a dust-covered horse, his deputy beside him. They went straight to the sheriff's office and began asking questions. Silas was waiting at the Silver Spur when the marshal came looking for Ada. She was in the middle of her evening performance, her voice carrying clear and strong through the crowded saloon. The marshal stood in the doorway and watched her sing, his expression unreadable. When the song ended, he approached. Miss Ada Wade. Ada's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. Yes, I am Marshal Garrett. I need to ask you some questions about your background. Before she could respond, Silas stepped between them. His hand rested on Ada's shoulder, possessive and protective. Miss Wade is my fiancée, Marshal. If you have questions, you can ask them in front of me. Garrett's eyes narrowed. And you are? Silas Pruitt. I work at the Star Ranch. This woman is under my protection. That is interesting, Mr. Pruitt, because I have a wire from a Mr. Clayton Vance describing his missing wife. The description matches Miss Wade rather closely. Ada forced herself to meet Garrett's gaze. I do not know anyone named Clayton Vance, Marshal. I have lived in Broken Bluff for 8 months. Before that, I was in Silver City, working as a seamstress. If you need references, I can provide them. Garrett studied her. His gaze flicked to the ring on her finger, then to Silas's rigid stance. You have proof of your identity. I have employment records from the Silver Spur. I have testimony from the ranch owner and half the town that I am exactly who I claim to be. Her voice hardened. I am not some outlaw's wife, Marshall. I am a working woman, trying to build a respectable life. The silence stretched. Garrett's deputy shifted uncomfortably. Finally, Garrett said, if you are telling the truth, you have nothing to worry about. But if I find out you are lying, Miss Wade, engagement or not, I will arrest you as a material witness. He turned and walked out. The saloon erupted in whispers. Silas's hand tightened on Ada's shoulder, and she could feel the tension vibrating through him. They waited in her room above the saloon while the marshal made his inquiries. Silas paced like a caged animal. Ada sat by the window, watching the street below, waiting for the moment when everything would fall apart. It came 2 hours later. A rider thundered into town, covered in trail dust, and went straight to the sheriff's office. Ada could not hear the conversation, but she saw the marshal emerge, his expression set and determined. He knows. She said it quietly, without emotion, because emotion would shatter her. Somehow, he knows. Silas stopped pacing. Then, we leave. Tonight. I have horses ready at the livery. We ride for the territorial line and we do not stop. No. Ada stood, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. Running will only confirm his suspicions. We stay. We face this. And if Clayton comes, we deal with that when it happens. Sarah, if Vance gets his hands on you again, I cannot protect you from the law. Maybe not. But I am done running. She crossed to him, looked up into his hard, fierce face. For 8 months, I have been hiding, pretending, waiting for the moment when it all collapsed. I am tired, Silas. If this is the end, at least it will be on my terms. His hands came up, gripped her shoulders. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met. Good. Because I am going to need that to survive what comes next. The knock on the door came at midnight. Silas answered it, his body blocking Ada from view. The sheriff stood in the hallway, his expression apologetic and tired. Mr. Pruitt. Miss Wade. The marshal wants you both at the land office. Now. They walked through the dark town in silence. The land office was lit with lamps, and through the windows, Ada could see the marshal, his deputy, and another man. A man she recognized, even from a distance. Even after 2 years. Even though she had prayed, she would never see him again. Clayton Vance stood with his back to the window, tall and distinguished in an expensive coat, his silver-shot hair perfectly groomed. He looked every inch the respectable gentleman, the wronged husband, the man of means and influence who commanded respect wherever he went. Ada stopped walking. Her legs would not carry her forward. Silas took her hand, his grip hard and grounding. You do not have to face him. We can still run. She wanted to. Every instinct screamed at her to turn and flee. But running had not saved her. Hiding had not saved her. The only thing left was to stand and fight, even if she lost. I face him. But you stay with me. Always. They entered the land office together. Clayton turned, and his face transformed. Relief. Joy. The perfect mask of a devoted husband reunited with his lost wife. Sarah. Thank God. I thought I would never see you again. Ada said nothing. Silas's hand stayed locked around hers. The marshal watched them both. Mr. Vance claims this woman is his wife, Sarah Vance, who disappeared 2 years ago under suspicious circumstances. He has provided marriage documentation and witness testimony. Miss Wade, do you deny being Sarah Vance? She met Clayton's eyes, saw the cold calculation beneath the warm facade, saw the warning, the threat. The promise that if she defied him now, the consequences would be severe. I do not deny it. The words dropped like stones into still water. Silas's grip on her hand tightened until it hurt. The marshal's expression hardened. Clayton smiled. Then, you are married to Mr. Vance, and you will be returning home with him. No. Ada's voice was steady, clear, absolute. I left him because he is a violent man who beat me and controlled every aspect of my life. I am not his wife anymore. I will never be his wife again. Clayton's smile did not waver, but his eyes went cold. Sarah has always been prone to dramatic exaggerations, Marshal. She had a nervous condition, hysteria. I have documentation from a physician confirming her fragile mental state. Fragile mental state. The phrase was familiar. Clayton had used it before, whenever Ada tried to assert herself, whenever she spoke up, whenever she did anything that challenged his control. It was the ultimate weapon. The reason no one would believe her. The reason she had run instead of seeking help. Silas stepped forward, his voice hard as iron. I do not care what documentation you have, Vance. She is not going with you. Clayton turned his attention to Silas for the first time. And who are you to interfere between a man and his lawful wife? The man who is going to marry her. Silas pulled Ada closer. We are engaged. She chose me. Whatever your marriage was, it is over. A marriage does not simply end because a woman decides to run away. Clayton's voice remained calm, reasonable. The law is clear. Sarah is my wife. She returns with me, or I press charges for desertion and theft. She took items of value when she left. Jewelry. Money. I have been more than patient, but my generosity has limits. It was a lie. Ada had taken nothing but the clothes on her back and $20 she had saved in secret over 3 years. But Clayton was building a legal case, a web of accusations that would make her the criminal instead of the victim. The marshal looked between them, his expression troubled. This is a domestic matter. Unless Miss Wade or Mrs. Vance can provide proof of abuse, I have no authority to prevent a husband from reclaiming his wife. She has proof. Silas's voice was sharp. Scars. Injuries. Witnesses who can testify to her state when she arrived in Silver City. Healed injuries from 2 years ago. The marshal shook his head. That would never hold up in court, Pruitt. You know that. The room tilted. Ada felt the walls closing in, felt the trap snapping shut. Clayton had won. He always won. Because the law was on his side. Because men with money and influence always found a way to bend the system to their will. She looked at Silas and saw desperation in his eyes. Saw him searching for an angle, a solution, a way to keep his promise. But there was no way. Not within the boundaries of law and society. Unless she broke those boundaries herself. Marshal Garrett. Ada's voice cut through the tension. I have a confession to make. Sarah, Do not. Silas's voice was urgent. Warning. She ignored him. I did take something when I left my husband. But it was not jewelry or money. I took documents. Ledgers. Proof that Clayton Vance has been stealing from his business partners, bribing land officials, and running illegal operations across 3 territories. I hid those documents in Silver City, and if he forces me to return with him, I will make sure every newspaper from here to Denver publishes them. The silence was absolute. Clayton's mask slipped, just for a moment, showing the rage beneath. You are lying. Am I? Ada met his gaze without flinching. You know exactly which ledgers I mean. The ones you kept in the locked desk in your study. The ones you thought I was too stupid to find, too weak to understand. I copied every page, every bribe, every fraudulent deed, every illegal transaction, and I will burn your reputation to the ground before I let you take me back. It was a bluff, a complete fabrication. Ada had never seen Clayton's ledgers, had no idea if he even kept records of illegal activity. But she knew him, knew his arrogance, knew that a man who built his fortune on corruption would absolutely keep documentation. Because men like Clayton believed they were untouchable. And she knew he would not risk calling her bluff. Not publicly. Not with a federal marshal watching. Clayton's hands clenched at his sides. You would ruin yourself along with me. No one would believe the hysterical accusations of a runaway wife. Maybe. Ada's voice was ice. But are you willing to take that chance? Because I have nothing left to lose, Clayton. You made sure of that. So either you walk away now and let me live my life in peace, or I destroy you. The marshal looked between them, clearly out of his depth. This has become considerably more complicated. Clayton's jaw worked. His eyes promised violence, promised retribution, promised that this was far from over. But when he spoke, his voice was controlled. I will not be extorted by a woman who stole my name and my trust. If she wants her freedom so badly, she can have it. I wash my hands of her. He turned and walked out. The door slammed behind him with final force. Ada's legs gave out. Silas caught her, held her upright, as she struggled to breathe through the crushing weight of relief and terror and exhaustion. The marshal watched them with a complicated expression. Miss Wade, or Mrs. Vance, or whoever you are, I suggest you make yourself scarce for a while. Vance will not let this go. Men like him do not forgive humiliation. I know. Ada's voice was barely a whisper. And if you really do have those documents, you should consider sending them to the territorial governor. Might be the only way to keep Vance from coming back. She nodded, too drained to explain that the documents did not exist. That she had gambled everything on a desperate lie. That Clayton would figure out the truth eventually. And when he did, his revenge would be absolute. But tonight, she had won. Tonight, she was free. Silas half carried her back to the Silver Spur. They made it to her room before she started shaking. He sat her down on the bed and knelt in front of her, his hands framing her face. You were magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. I lied. Her voice broke. There are no documents. Nothing. It was all a bluff. I know. So did he. Eventually. But you bought us time. That is all we needed. Time for what? Clayton will figure out the truth. He will come back. He will find a way to hurt me that the law cannot touch. Then we leave. Not running. Relocating. The Star Ranch foreman owes me a favor. He has contacts in California. We can go there. Start over. Build something real. Ada stared at him. We. He kept saying we, as if they were truly bound together. As if this fake engagement had become something more solid than pretense. Silas, this was supposed to be temporary. You were supposed to let me go when it was over. Is it over? The question hung between them. Heavy, with possibility. Weighted with all the things they had not said. All the moments when his protection had felt less like duty and more like something deeper. I do not know. Ada reached up, touched his face, felt the roughness of stubble and the heat of skin. I do not know how to be with someone without losing myself. Clayton taught me that love is just another word for ownership. I am not him. Silas covered her hand with his. And I do not want to own you. I want to stand beside you. I want to watch you become whoever you were meant to be before he tried to break you. If that is alone, I will accept it. But if you want a partner, I am here. The words cracked something open inside her. Not the brittle shell of survival she had built around herself. Something deeper. The place where hope had been buried for so long, she forgot it existed. She leaned forward and kissed him. Soft. Tentative. Testing. His hands stayed gentle on her face, letting her control the moment, letting her decide how much or how little she wanted to give. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark and intense. Stay. Not because you need protection. Not because you have nowhere else to go. Stay because you want to. I want to. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, like freedom and terror combined. But I need time. I need to learn how to trust again. How to be close to someone without fear. We have time. Silas stood, pulled her to her feet. And we have a fake engagement to make real, if you want it. Or we can dissolve it and just be two people learning to build something honest. Make it real. Ada looked down at the gold band on her finger. Your mother's ring. I want to keep it, if you will let me. It is already yours. The words settled between them like a promise. Not a legal bond. Not a cage. Just a choice. Freely made. By two people who understood the cost of trust and the value of freedom. Over the next 3 days, Ada and Silas made plans. The Star Ranch foreman confirmed that he had contacts in California, near Sacramento, where land was opening up and a man with horse training skills could build a solid business. Ada sold her few possessions and gave notice at the Silver Spur. The owner was sorry to lose her, but he understood. Half the town understood. The other half whispered about scandal and impropriety, but their opinions no longer mattered. On the 4th day, word came that Clayton Vance had left the territory. The marshal's investigation into the bank robbery had turned up evidence of Vance's involvement in money laundering schemes connected to the fugitive. The documents Ada claimed to have might not exist, but the marshal had started digging based on her accusations, and what he found was damning enough. Clayton would not be coming back. Not soon. Maybe not ever. They left Broken Bluff on a clear morning in late September. with everything they owned packed into a wagon, and 2 good horses hitched in tandem. Ada wore her practical brown dress and her sturdiest shawl. Silas wore his weathered tan coat and a hat pulled low against the sun. The gold band on Ada's finger caught the light as she gripped the wagon seat. They stopped at the top of the first ridge and looked back at the town. Broken Bluff spread across the valley, small and ordinary, and already fading into memory. Silas glanced at her. Regrets. Ada thought about the woman she had been when she first arrived. Terrified. Hiding. Pretending to be someone safe and unremarkable. She thought about the woman she was now. Still scared, but no longer hiding. Still carrying scars, but no longer defined by them. None. She turned to face the road ahead. Only hope. They rode toward California, toward Sacramento, toward a future that was uncertain and unwritten. But it was their future, built on honesty and hard choices, and the kind of trust that grew slowly, carefully, between 2 people who understood the value of freedom. Behind them, Broken Bluff disappeared into the distance. Ahead, the road stretched long and dusty and full of possibility. Ada reached across the wagon seat and laced her fingers through Silas's. He glanced at her, surprise and warmth flickering across his face. She smiled. Not the performance smile she had worn on stage. The real one. The one that hurt a little, because it cracked open the protective shell she had built around her heart. "Tell me about California," she said. Silas's thumb brushed over her knuckles, over the gold band that was no longer just a symbol of protection, but a promise of partnership. "It is warm, good soil, plenty of water, room to build something that lasts, something that lasts." The words settled into her bones. For so long, Ada had lived moment to moment, survival to survival, never daring to think beyond the next day. But now, with the open road ahead and Silas beside her, she could imagine a life measured in years instead of heartbeats. What will we build? A ranch, if we can manage it. Small at first. I will train horses. You can do whatever you want. Sing, if you still want to. Or something else entirely. It is your choice. Your choice. 2 words that meant everything. 2 words Clayton had never given her. 2 words that made all the difference between a cage and a partnership. "I think I would like to learn about horses." Ada watched the landscape roll past. Golden grass and distant mountains and sky so blue it hurt. "You could teach me. I would like that." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. The sun climbed higher. The wagon creaked and rattled over the rough road. Behind them, dust rose in a thin plume, marking their passage. Ahead, the road curved around a stand of cottonwoods and disappeared into open country. Silas. Ada's voice was quiet. "Thank you for standing with me, for giving me a choice when I thought I had none left." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you for trusting me. I know how much that cost you." She leaned her head against his shoulder, felt the solid warmth of him, felt the steady rhythm of the wagon and the horses and the road carrying them forward into the unknown. This was not the ending she had imagined when she first fled Montana with nothing but desperation and a stolen name. But it was better. Because it was real. Because it was earned. Because it was built on the kind of trust that only came from facing darkness together and choosing, again and again, to reach for the light. The road stretched ahead, long and dusty and full of promise. And Ada Wade, who was also Sarah Vance, who was finally truly just herself, rode into the future with her hand in Silas's and hope burning steady in her chest. They would reach Sacramento in 3 weeks if the weather held. They would find land. They would build a ranch. They would make mistakes and have arguments and face challenges that would test everything they thought they knew about partnership and trust. But they would face it together. And that made all the difference.